In this presentation, I'm going to talk more about accessibility and also talk about some of the issues with Web 2.0 and some other accessibility issues. If you've probably heard the term Web 2.0, it's kind of become a little cliched at this point, but really what it refers to is those web technologies that allow more interaction than the previous quote-unquote version of the web. So in the early days of the World Wide Web, it was really more a read-only type of medium. I would create a page and you would read it. And now there's a lot more user interaction, user-created content, YouTube, blogs, Twitter, wikis. And so it's not just a static medium anymore. That's really what Web 2.0 refers to. Web 2.0 is an interesting development with respect to accessibility, partly because it captures, at least for me, how quickly web technology is changing and how standards, like the standards that accessibility guidelines are based on, have trouble keeping up. So reactions to Web 2.0 from what I would call web accessibility fundamentals, people who believe that everything should always be 100% accessible 100% of the time, and also folks who are more Web 2.0 skeptics, not necessarily accessibility people, but Web 2.0 skeptics. A couple of reactions. These things use AJAX, and we know that's a bad thing. Well, what AJAX is a technology that allows pages to update dynamically or change their content. You know, if you're on a search page and you're typing in a search term and it's changing what you see dynamically as it's happening. Facebook uses AJAX for pop-ups, things like that. The problem with AJAX is that when elements on the page change, that might present problems for an assistive technology user, particularly a screen reader user, because the screen reader reads the code of the page linearly. So then if it's read past where the AJAX is in the code of the page and something changes, the user might not see it. Second Life is problematic, primarily because it's almost entirely visual. It also relies a lot on keyboard commands. Facebook and social networking tools, skeptics just don't feel that those should be used. But I think that there's another side to this as well. AJAX can provide accessibility benefits. Maybe not for people with visual disabilities, but for other types of disabilities. If information is changing, or if information is being presented in a more narrow or more focused way. This obviously might have benefits for users that have a cognitive disability or need the information more refined. I also find it interesting that different versions of social networking tools are more accessible than others. For example, the web-based mobile version of Facebook is far more accessible than the standard web-based version of Facebook. So I don't remember right now, I think it's m.facebook.com. And what that provides is a really much more stripped down version of Facebook. It kind of gets rid of a lot of the fanciness, but it provides all the real core functionality of, the news feed, connections to friends. I think there's some basic chat mechanism. You can't do any Farmville, things like that, but in many respects that's okay. So even within some of these websites and some of these Web 2.0 tools, there are different ways to access the sites that provide more accessibility or more customizability or a more flexible approach for users. So things like social media, Facebook, Twitter, are being used by people with disabilities. And what's interesting about some of these social networking tools, because they are evolving so quickly, they do represent in many ways some of the cutting edge aspects of technology, and I think point out some of the issues that exist maybe in the broader World Wide Web that maybe had been under the radar before. One of these is CAPTCHA, C-A-P-C-H-A. or reCAPTCHAs, which is a more sophisticated version. To be able to get a Facebook account, to be able to do many things on the World Wide Web these days, you have to be able to pass a CAPTCHA. And what CAPTCHA stands for, it's an acronym, Completely Automated Public Turing Test to Tell Computers and Humans Apart. Turing tests were coined by Alan Turing, a famous computer scientist and cryptologist in the 40s and 50s, really as ways to determine what was artificial intelligence and what was human intelligence, computers versus humans. And so you encounter these security checks where they want you to type in what is being represented on an image. Well, there are a number of accessibility issues with that, obviously. If you can't see the images, it's hard to type in what they are. I personally find them hard sometimes. Just their letters all jumbled together. Sometimes it takes me a couple to pass one. One of the solutions to this was providing audio tests. And if you've ever been to a site that has CAPTCHA and has audio option, I would suggest you listen to it because they're difficult to listen to as well. So there is this balance between trying to ensure that a website is not just going to be overrun by spam bots, but balancing that with being ensuring that the security mechanisms aren't locking people out. It is important to talk about the relationship between accessibility and usability. And I'll talk a lot about this in this class. And partly, each individual person needs to come up with their own definition of usability and their own working definition of usability. Accessibility really, means, does this site allow access for people with disabilities? And there's a way to check that. There are standards, the W3 standards. There are laws, or there's some legal standards. Usability doesn't have technical standards. It just means, can the most people, the largest number of people, use this as to the highest degree possible. So obviously, it makes sense that by having a site be accessible, you're including people with disabilities who otherwise wouldn't be able to use the site into the larger group of people who use the site. So you are improving its usability. That doesn't mean, though, that a site that meets technical standards for accessibility is as usable as it could be. And that's a little odd to hear. And sometimes I think it's a little confusing. So what I like to say is that usability really always needs to include accessibility. If you want to have a highly usable site, it has to be accessible. However, accessibility doesn't necessarily mean that it's usable or as usable as possible. So there is, this kind of odd relationship. So the important thing to take away from this is they're not the same term. And generally, and I said this in my previous presentation, generally measures to improve accessibility improve usability. But don't just take that as a given. This has already come up a little bit in discussion. Learning disabilities are not dealt with particularly well in a lot of the accessibility standards. So the Web 2.0 guidelines don't address all the needs of people with disabilities, particularly cognitive, language, and learning disabilities. And there are a number of reasons for this. One, and this came up in some of the conversation, is that hidden disabilities that are not as readily apparent, I think are not as well understood by the general population. Often they carry some stigma with them that people may not want to present. I have a learning disability, or I have ADHD, I have dyslexia. And so those groups can often be underrepresented in decisions and discussions around accessibility. So I think part of it is that there's not a clear-cut way to address these needs. If a person is blind and they use a screen reader, there's a specific technology that we know and we can kind of make adaptations technologically for. However, if a person has a learning disability or cognitive disability, there is a wide range of strategies, techniques, and technologies that could go into making a site more accessible for them. However, it's not as clearly documented, and because it's more broad, it's harder. It's harder to do. So I know this may not be a very satisfying answer, but I think that it's still an outstanding issue in the world of web accessibility, and something that we need to continue to work on. These next few slides, I'm going to try and keep my comments brief and show some accessibility and usability issues. So on this slide, the best web page ever shows how a web page can be constructed where it's just non-descriptive. So for example, there's three examples here. For the secret of everlasting happiness, click here. Well, the click here is actually a little irrelevant, and it's not descriptive at all. Similarly, the other two options: to guarantee universal peace and brotherhood, click here. To remotely control your TV, click here. By the time you get to click here, you're having to look back to see what it is why you're clicking. A screen reader user might actually use a technique called bringing up a links list dialog, in which the page, the screen reader user will show all of the links on a page up front. It's very useful for coming to a page and kind of wanting to see where you can go from there. Well, in this example, if a user with a screen reader brings up a links list dialog, all they're going to see are 3 links that say click here, click here, click here. So they're actually going to have to wade down into the page and navigate through and listen to the sentence that was describing the click here previously. It's much more efficient and then also much more accessible to use the technique down at the bottom of this slide. Read The Secret of Everlasting Happiness. And Secret of Everlasting Happiness is descriptive, and it's also the link. You click on that and it will take you to the Secret of Everlasting Happiness. Guarantee universal peace and brotherhood, or remotely control your TV. So a screen reader user who's just bringing up a list of links will see Secret of Everlasting Happiness as a link, or universal peace and brotherhood as a link, or remotely control your TV as a link. Hopefully you see the distinction between just saying click here and remotely control your TV. For other users, it just makes the page a little tighter, and also just having the links be descriptive makes it easier to use. One of the things you'll hear a lot about in conversations around web accessibility are text equivalents and alt text. Alt text is really just it's an abbreviation of alternative text, and it's descriptive text for images. So here we have a screen that the images have not downloaded and displayed. It's, say, an example from a weather site. We have a forecast where the images haven't downloaded, and they might be images that would show clouds or sun or rain or snow or whatever. And because the images haven't downloaded, there's no information there. So it might be that the image name would be displayed. So in this example, the image name is sunshine.jpg. Well, that's probably actually a pretty descriptive image name, but they usually aren't that descriptive. So where this is a problem is if the images don't download for whatever reason. If you're on a slow internet, you're on a device that doesn't download or display the images properly. If you're a screen reader user, you probably have images turned off because a screen reader doesn't read images. So the alt text is really important. So here we have the same page, same example, but each of the images has alt text included with it. If you're familiar with HTML, it's you've just added an attribute to the image source tag, so that you have the name of the picture, but also you have alt text, and so you can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sunshine, cloudy, snow, and Thursday is a heat wave. And that image then is displayed that text is displayed if the images don't download, but it's also read to a screen reader user. This is really important, and alt text needs to be equivalent and it needs to be appropriate. So if you have an image that has text in it, an image that says Syracuse University, well, the alt text for that is Syracuse University. One of the problems people make is that they actually err on the side of making their alt text too descriptive, or putting alt text in for images that are what I would call eye candy or really irrelevant. What we're talking about here is ensuring that there's no information on the page that's bound up only in one form, like an image. So if there is a little, scenery, image of scenery in the background, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the content of the page or the meaning, it really doesn't need alt text. Honestly, the important thing here is making sure that the content of the page is relayed. One thing that comes up is people putting in too much alt text. So where you might have, in this example where it says sunshine, cloudy, snow, heat wave, you have alt text where somebody says, the sun, it's bright orange on a light blue background over a beach landscape, whatever. Well, it's good, and that was a nice description, but it really isn't necessary. So it's not just providing the alt text, but also ensuring that it's appropriate. And that's where a machine validation, like Cynthia says, or Wave, all they can do is tell whether there's alt text or not, but they can't tell whether it's appropriate or not. And that's where having a smart, knowledgeable person comes in really handy. So making sure that we're just not bogging down a screen reader user with a bunch of text that nobody else would see or hear. Okay, well, how do we go about making things more accessible? This is an example of a page that's been styled using cascading style sheets, which we usually refer to as CSS. And CSS is a really good technique for actually a good accessibility approach, because it separates format from content, meaning you have a style sheet in which you are creating styles for particular elements of a page, and it's nice you can change the style sheet without having to go in and monkey around with the page. However, you can also use CSS to change how the content of a page displays. So this is a page I mocked up a few years ago, actually, where I use CSS to arrange the text elements on a page so that when you look at it, you can kind of see that it means welcome to ECI 509B. But the way that the text is entered into the HTML on the page and the way a screen reader would read it looks a little different. This is how that same page would look or be read to a screen reader user. And for this example, I was just using Links Viewer, which is an online links browser. And Links is just a text-based browser. It's really a nice tool if you're interested in very quickly seeing what a page would, how it would be rendered in a text-only format, which is essentially what a screen reader does. So you can see here that this page would just read to welcome ECI 509B. And without the visual cues, the seeing the words together and laid out the way they were, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So just the caveat here is don't get too fancy with some of the technologies that are out there, even ones that are presented as being accessibility solutions. This actually took me a lot of work to mock up this example, but I thought it was also really good just to show that it's helpful to look at your web pages using a variety of tools so that you can see how they might be rendered differently. This is another example of why it's important not to just relate information in one form. In this example, information is being relayed solely by color. This is a calendar from a year-round school in which students are in multiple tracks, and so each track attends at a different time, or differing times. And so really the only way that you are able to know when a track is supposed to be in school is by color. So there's no other way to know other than color. And this slide shows what this calendar would look like for an individual with red-green color blindness. There's no real clear way to differentiate between track 1 and track 4. The colors look almost identical, very similar. There's very little differentiation. Also, if you were using a screen reader to access the site, it would be very hard to know. I mean, you might not know even what color those cells were colored without having to sift through some of the code that styled the table. So this is a demonstration of how relaying information only in one way presents accessibility issues. Now, the fix for this, which I unfortunately don't have an illustration for, is pretty straightforward, and all it amounted to was putting the number of the track in each table cell. So for all the track 1 cells, they were colored red or whatever the color was, I don't remember now, but also they had a 1 in them, and track 2 also had a number 2 in them. And so that fixed that accessibility issue. It was still not the most graceful site because the table was really long. It scrolled off the right-hand side of the page. But this is an example of the fix was actually pretty easy. It didn't require a lot of technology. Another place we see the color-only problem is where you might have a list of information and it will say, here are our new products. The new editions are in red, something like that. And so where there's differentiation between status of something, but it's only provided in color. And I typically tell people, mark it with an asterisk, scan color, or some other little notation that if somebody can't see the color or can't otherwise differentiate those colors, there's another way to get that information. And last but not least, I'm going to close here with just a few tools that, again, I'll be talking about throughout the session, but are tools that are useful for helping evaluate aspects of a page's accessibility. Wave, which will actually give you a breakdown of a page and show you visually with little icons where there might be problems. Cynthia Says is another tool. It's kind of similar. It validates your page against either 508 or the W3 standards. And VizCheck is the tool that I use to create the colorblind simulation. So you can go to VizCheck and run the colorblindness simulation on a page or on an image and see what it would look like for an individual with colorblindness. So there are lots of tools out there. I'm going to try and be presenting them as we go along, but here are 3 really good and useful ones.